go forward.
Yeah, go forward. Right there, the third pew is about, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Okay.
All right, you're on.
Welcome to our Wednesday interactive Bible study as we continue our study on our faith and the coronavirus. Those of you who were here Sunday, remember that the content, the thing that made Israel do what they did in the first part of the Bible was that God had made a promise to Abraham. He told Abraham to leave his country and his father's household and go to a land that he would show them. And the land became all-possessing, that promised land that they were headed for one day. And they got there. But as they got there, Moses in Deuteronomy gave them a warning that these were the decrees and laws that you must be careful to follow in the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess as long as you live in the land. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains and on the hills and under every spreading tree where the nations are dispossessing worship their gods, and break down their altars and smash their sacred stones and burn their Ashtaroth poles with fire and cut them down, the idols and the gods, then wipe out their names from those places, for you must not worship the Lord your God in that way. That was a good beginning. But one generation later, Israel goes into idol worship. And it won't be long after 3 kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, that this promised land they had worked so long to get into divides. 10 tribes going north and 2 tribes going south. God sent prophets. And I'm beginning with Elijah because of what's said in James chapter 5 about him. He's just a man like us. He's just a human being that God uses. He's not Superman. He's not the holiest man that ever walked the earth. That belongs to Jesus. But he's somebody that allowed his life to be used by God during a tough time. Now Elijah, the Tishbite from Tishbe in Galilee, said to Ahab, "As the Lord of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." And the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Leave here, turn eastward and hide in the Kerith ravine east of Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I'll order the ravens to feed you." I don't know how appetizing that was, or the idea that it would not rain until he said it would rain. But Elijah was strong, and he goes to the brook where God had sent him, and the ravens came and they fed him. And then the brook dries up. That brings us to our first set of questions, and you all did great. When something good or bad happens in life, who do you give credit or blame? Casey Strasbaugh writes, "Good, God. Bad, God normally teaching me a lesson when I can clear my head enough and think clearly." Michelle Ann Fortney says, "All good things come from God, so he gets the glory. Bad things happen because I'm listening to my flesh, so I'm to blame." Gary Foreman writes, "Blessings are good things that come from God. Bad things happen sometimes. The power comes from faith. So the more faith we have in God, the better things will be, even if someone else sees them as bad. And Jackie Smith writes, it depends. Should I blame myself for not getting up with Dave that morning that he fell? Or Dave for deciding to walk the dogs that morning? No. I remind myself to thank God for answering my prayers, that he died before the disease became debilitating. Good answers, folks. Good answers. Keep them coming in each week. The brook dries up. And God comes to Elijah, and he said, go to once at Zarephath of Sidon and stay there, for I've commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks, and she called her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar that I may have a drink? And she was going to get it and bring it to me, please, with a piece of bread. Now, the walk from where he was to where God sent him wasn't an easy walk. It was a long, hard trek. Remember, there's not much water now. The brook dried up, and so did a lot of other sources. So when he gets to Zarephath, he's hungry and he's thirsty. And he comes to a woman, and he looks and she says, as sure as your God lives, I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. The crops have failed. And the things that they pressed for oil, usually olives, they would have been in short supply too. And so she said, our only plans were to go get our last meal and die. But Elijah goes and says, don't be afraid, go home, do as you have said, but first make a small cake of bread for me. And what you have, bring it to me. And then make something for your son. They're collecting the sticks to eat their last meal. Flour and oil cooked over a fire. They know there won't be any tomorrow. It'll all be gone. But Elijah tells her what to do, and she does it. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day that the Lord gives rain on the land. God keeps the jar of flour full. It keeps the bottle of oil full. And they eat during that whole time. It's an easy time after he got there. But the faith it took for that woman to make him something to eat when they had nothing is something that's very important. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house becomes ill. And it gets worse and worse. And then he stops breathing. She said to Elijah, what do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? Notice where she's putting the blame. You're the man of God, so you had to come from some reason. I've sinned. Is that the reason you came and killed my son? Punishment from God? Give me your son, Elijah replied, and he took him from her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on his bed. When something goes wrong in our lives, who or what do we blame? This one got pretty interesting. Mike O'Neill writes, sometimes circumstances, but typically I'm my own worst enemy. Fran Robinson writes, Mike O'Neill, me too, exactly right. Susan White reads, Mike O'Neill, I too am my worst enemy. Life has taught me that sometimes when I think something has gone wrong, it is really just another learning experience. Sue Shumate writes, somebody else, if they hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have done this. Gary Foreman. I love Gary's thoughts. Well, it all depends. But I'll blame others, then I'll realize I was the one at fault. And Sue Shumate writes again, the devil made me do it. And Gary Foreman writes, lots of luck. Oh, y'all are so good at this. A couple more. Karen Vester, I always think it's my fault. And what my daughter from another mother said above. Susie May says, the boss or whoever made the decision. And Karen Pennington said, myself mostly. Blame's tough. She's lost her son and she's blaming her sins for losing her son. But Elijah takes him up to the room. And after he takes him to the room, he lays him down on the rug usually that he slept on. And he puts his body across the boy's, and life comes back into the son. He was just a man, according to James. But if there was a man that needs to be brought out tonight in our time, it's the prophet Ezekiel. If you haven't read Ezekiel, let me give you an invitation to start. He is one of those great. In chapter 3, he says this, and he said to me, Son of man, eat what is before you. Eat this scroll. Then go and speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. Then he said to me, Son of man, eat this scroll I am giving you, and fill your stomach with it. So I ate it, and it tasted sweet as honey in my mouth. Now, the reason I'm starting there is because he's introducing something that's unique to us. When you know something is coming, do you get ready for it, or do you just ignore it? Ann Burton writes, for me, it depends on how much I'm living in my fear of what's coming. If I can be logical and try to take care of my emotions in a safe way, I can prepare for something to the best of my ability. If I'm too fearful of what's to come, I find myself spending a lot of time with those feelings that are disadvantageous in any situation, really. Those times when I may ignore or procrastinate on a situation. Rhonda Dickerson writes, if something good, I get excited and motivated. If something dreadful, I would drag my feet most likely. I'm usually challenged to prioritize my time properly. Fran writes, I've never liked to put things off, good or bad. And Lois Cox writes, usually I get ready. The year of the fires, we were under a possible evacuation order. So I got things together that I would want to take with us. The most important things, and I put them in the back of the car just in case. We never had to go, but we were ready. And Sue Coleman writes, I get ready for it and I pray God will help me through it. So this will be what happens. I will try my best to handle it. And Mike O'Neill, typically, I like to take my time and understand things the best I can before putting too much energy into things. Nevertheless, I like to get ahead of the ball game when it makes sense, so that I'm not overwhelmed when things are upon me. And Cindy Foreman just writes, I get ready. Good stuff, folks. Keep it coming. We were talking about the scroll that he was eating. This introduces us to a way of thinking. He said to me, now after you eat the scroll, I want you to go to the house of Israel and speak my words to them. Now, if you underline Bible verses, go to the house of Israel and speak my words to them. You are not being sent to a people of obscure speech or difficult language, but to the house of Israel. What he's talking about is known as apocalyptic literature. It was known when Israel got in trouble that this was the kind of thing that they would bring out because they could get truth across, they could encourage others, and those who didn't know God's people couldn't be encouraged. So it was a hidden language, especially when God's people were going through rough times. Now, how many times in the Bible does it exist? Well, let me give you that verse again. Son of man, eat what is before you, eat this scroll, and then go speak to the house of Israel. Go to the last book of the Bible, Revelation 10, 9 through 11, and the angel comes and asked him to give the little scroll, and he said, take it and eat it, and it'll turn your stomach sour, but in your mouth it'll be sweet as honey. And notice how close this is to exactly what God told Ezekiel. I took the little scroll from the angel's hand, I ate it, and it tasted sweet in my mouth, but after I'd eaten it, my stomach turned sour. Then I was told, you must prophesy again about many people, languages, and kings. Now, this language is not hidden away. In fact, if you know the books that have it, you'll run into a lot of it. Ezekiel is one of the books that if you don't understand apocalyptic literature, it'll throw you. So will Daniel, Jeremiah, and Zechariah. And then Revelation in the New Testament. But it is always there to help God's people in terrible times when they're living their faith. The reason it's written in the book of Revelation is Rome has decided the Jews aren't a good people to have around, and so they throw them out of Rome and out of their own homeland. They persecute them, and they look at Christianity as an offshoot of the Jewish religion. So Rome is persecuting Christians. Apocalyptic literature is appropriate in all those times. All through the Old and the New Testament. And if you read Jewish literature, you'll find it in some of that. Then God starts telling him things that are a little harder to understand. He tells him, "Son of man, take a clay tablet and put it in front of you and draw the city of Jerusalem on it. Then lay siege to it. Erect siege works against it. Build a ramp up to it. Set camps against it. Put battering rams around it. Take an iron pan and place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and turn your face toward it. It will be under siege. And you shall besiege it, and this will be a sign to the house of Israel." And then lie on your left side and put the sin of Israel upon yourself. You are to bear sin for the number of days you lie on your side. I have assigned the same number of days as the years of their sin. So for 390 days you will bear the sin of the house of Israel. And after you have finished this, you'll lie down this time on the right side and bear the sin of the house of Judah. I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. That was hard. If you can only lie on your left side for 390 days and you can't turn off it, that's hard. It also catches the eye of the people around. He's got this little fort in front of him. He's got the things that will besiege Jerusalem. He's got rams and battering rams, and they're numerous. And he's laying there the whole 390 days. He got the attention of the people of Israel. Warren Wiersbe probably has the best guess of the length of time. He said when you add up the years of the kings of Judah from Rehoboam to Zedekiah as recorded in 1st and 2nd Kings, you have a total of 394 years. But there were 4 good years in there. We don't know exactly why, but God said to do it so people would notice. And that brings us to what prophets were. Ordinary people that God chose to use to get his people to return to him. It is the goal of every prophet ever mentioned in the Bible. The people have left. Their task is to get them to go to extremes to get them back. To get them back to the God that loves them. The same is true for us today. We have lessons, but the whole reason we exist is to help people get back to their God, their Maker and their Redeemer. And if we can do that, God will be happy. Thank you for listening.